All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening to some of you, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Hamish Mackenzie, and thank you for joining us for this session on enterprise risk and compliance, a C-suite dilemma, sponsored today by ABB. And so in this era of rising cyber threats, enterprise risk compliance, they are now top priorities for the C-suite. And this session is going to dive into the details about how industrial leaders can protect their critical assets while still navigating that extremely complex world of cybersecurity. And I'm sure we'll all agree it's nothing if not complex. And there's lots of new threats coming up daily, of course. So cybersecurity and risk really is now very much a C-level topic. So with that said, let's introduce our special guests for you today. First up, we have Rob Putman, who's Global Manager, Cybersecurity Services at our sponsor today, ABB. Rob's based in Zurich and has a robust skill set that includes product management, SDLC, cloud computing, enterprise software, agile methodologies, and a lot more, all of which he uses to contribute valuable insights to the industry. He has an MBA from the University of Redlands. So thank you for joining us, Rob. Next, we have Sid Snitkin, who's Vice President, Cybersecurity Securities at ARC Advisory Group. Sid has primary responsibility for developing the strategic direction for ARC's cybersecurity products and services. He has 30 years of experience in automation, information systems, and manufacturing, and 20 of those years have been spent at ARC. He's published numerous studies, strategic reports on asset lifecycle management, supply chain management, analytics, and industrial cybersecurity. He has a bachelor's and a master's in physics from Carnegie Mellon. He also has an MBA and PhD in operations research and artificial intelligence from the University of Pittsburgh. And if that wasn't enough, in his spare time, he also teaches MBA classes in statistics, operations management, and risk management. So very busy man. Frankly, it's a miracle he's found time to be with us, but he has. So thank you very much for joining us, Sid. Next, we have Eric Byers, who's been on many of these sessions with me in the past. He is Senior Vice President, Software Intelligence at Exeger. Eric is recognized as one of the world's leading ICS and software supply chain security experts. He's the inventor of the Tofino security technology, the world's most widely deployed ICS-specific firewall, which has been licensed by industry giants like Honeywell, Schneider, Caterpillar, the list goes on. He's known for his leadership in international standards and research for industrial communications and supply chain risk management. He was a founding member of the ISA S99 standards program, which is now known as IEC 62643, chaired numerous working groups, and testified to the US Congress on the security of industrial control systems in national critical infrastructures. And right now, as the Senior VP of Supply Chain Integrity at Exeger, he's now focused on improving the reliability and security of the software used in critical systems. He has been an NTIA SBOM Awareness and Adoption Committee member and has authored numerous articles on the software bill of materials. So thanks for joining. Pleasure as always, Eric, for joining us. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Laline Carvalho-Neff, who's Vice President, Senior Analyst at Moody's Corporation. And in her role, Laline is responsible for analyzing and providing credit ratings for a wide range of property and casualty insurance and reinsurance companies. She brings over 20 years of experience in financial analysis and credit risk assessment, and she holds a bachelor's in finance and international business and a master's in environmental sciences and policy. So thank you very much for joining us, Laline. And finally, a very few words about me. I'm the moderator. I'm an ex-IDC analyst. I've been running my consulting business here in Munich, Germany since 2006. I work with CEOs, founders, and other senior executives in cybersecurity, all types of industrial software, but also other types of software, helping them basically grow their businesses more efficiently. And I also help them focus more and more on strategic work and evangelizing their businesses rather than getting bogged down in day-to-day operations. So that's what I do. If you want to find more about me, please look me up on LinkedIn. Shouldn't be too hard to find me. There's only one of me in Munich on LinkedIn as far as I know. So please do look me up and connect with me if you like. All right, so with that all said, let's get into it. And I like to always start these sessions with a bit of context. And so I wanted to come to you first, Sid. If you could just talk a little bit about how have cyber risks grown for industrial operations over the last few years at a kind of high level?
Yeah, I think you can look at it from two sides. That's the really thing that's really challenging is the threats from the outside. I mean, the actual attackers and things like that have certainly gotten more sophisticated. The cyber industry has become more sophisticated. So companies have to deal with much more sophisticated attacks than they used to, I think, and more of them. It's just a barrage of attacks. The other thing, and we were talking about this right before we went on live here, is from the inside. And to me, and this may sound strange because of my company, anyhow, I don't want to get off on my company right to talk about them, but it's that digitalization or digital transformation is completely changing operations. I mean, there's tremendous changes happening over, particularly the last 5 years, I would say. And it's not just the IoT devices that are being added, which are very bad, which bring in threats and things like that. But there's also the issue that it's this connectivity of operations that used to be isolated, or at least semi-isolated. Let me just say, at least controlled. Everybody's had some communication with plants, but this was very controlled. Now it's just opened the door because more pathways in, plus a lot of that functionality is being moved out into the cloud, into mobile device, using mobile devices, just a barrage of that, which just opens the door. And it's a very big risk for companies. And the good thing is in our business, I mean, it should be driving. If it's not, but I think it is. I see it a lot more interest at the board level and things like that to do something about that problem. And the last comment I would just say is it's become much more of an integrated issue between IT and OT today. So anyhow, we could talk about that later if you get into that. So,
well, exactly. That's exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I want to get onto now, actually, because exactly in the context of what you just said, this convergence between IT and OT is really a critical issue, obviously. And so, Rob, I wanted to ask you, a lot of people are talking about it, but is there actually alignment in the industry about really what it means, what it looks like? And has the topic been unpacked to a level where doing something about it, the action, the execution that you're gonna work on is really gonna have an impact?
Yeah, so well, I'll just take the position that that the convergence idea isn't unpacked well enough. So I always go to, well, what are use cases or examples of convergence done well or not done well? A simple example of done well is where an organization, an enterprise, brought together operators and their IT team, talked about the activities that they aspired to have the IT team perform, maintain, et cetera, within the operational environment, and then talked about the conditions around which those activities could be performed. They got alignment, right? We're not just going to come into a dispatched power plant and do HMI and workstation updates because you want to on the IT side. And when they were able to begin to appreciate the need not only to perform these activities in the environment, but coordinate it within the operational cadence, they discovered they could work together and they got their goals accomplished. The converse of that, of course, is if it's not thought through and the unique operational conditions aren't considered, IT can come in and push updates, make configuration changes, all those kind of things. And next thing you know, process is disrupted and nobody wants that. So that's an example of done well, not done well. But when you say IT-OT convergence, it just feels really broad to me. It goes into all kinds of areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, in that context, Eric, I wanted to ask you, it's for the C-level folks, cyber being ready, whatever that means, whether it's in the context of IT-OT convergence or just being prepared for cybersecurity, protecting those infrastructures can seem like almost like death by a thousand cuts, I think, a lot of the time, right? So where, from your perspective, from the C-level perspective, in your opinion, do they need to really focus in order to be effective when they decide, okay, yes, we need to do something about this? Where do they need to focus from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So first of all, I think it's really important to understand that you're going to have convergence. I mean, it's not going to go away. That horse left the barn. Yeah. And I think Rob nailed it. It's convergence done well or convergence done poorly. And for that, it really is defining how you're going to do convergence. Like not ignoring it, not saying there will not be any convergence, but having a full-blown convergence plan that when such and such a company needs to access data inside your control system, this is how they're going to do it. Or if your guys need to get data out of the cloud, this is how they're going to do it. Otherwise, you're going to get nasty surprises, and I'll give you a very specific surprise. This is for a very large oil company who had a tank monitoring system and they started to replace that tank in their tank farm with wireless transmitters to monitor it that were Wi-Fi. Well, they couldn't get the budget to build an entirely new process control Wi-Fi system across the tank farm. But guess what? There happened to be a handy IT wireless system there. So they just connected to that. And we're talking millions of dollars. This is a big project. And so suddenly we've got absolute raw process control data coming off this tank farm going right across the IT network. This is not a good situation. And it really is due to the lack of that. Like, this is how we request convergence. This is how we use each other's capabilities and assets. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing that I think that's really, really important is having the executive team really not get stuck into the weeds, but setting the policies and then having the response mechanisms when things go bad. And things go bad. I mean, you just ask the CISO at, say, Solar Winds or at Colonial Pipelines. Things will go bad. So what's your responses? How do you respond quickly? Who do you turn to? If you don't have a rapid response, you're going to look really bad. If you have a strategy and responsibilities and who you call, then I think you're in a position to be able to respond. And so I think it's laying out what you want and then having a way when things don't go according to plan, how do you respond and recover?
Okay. All right. So to round up this kind of starting point, if you like, this context, I wanted to come to Laleen now and get a slightly different perspective, which is obviously the insurance perspective. So maybe you can give us a bit of a feel, Laleen, for what Moody's current outlook is on the cyber insurance market in general, because obviously companies are looking to protect themselves as much as they can.
No, absolutely. And I think, Sid mentioned at the beginning of our discussion here that the frequency of cyber attacks is increasing and the complexity of potential attacks is also getting bigger. And that's really catching the attention of management teams. And I think more and more companies are coming to the conclusion that purchasing cyber insurance is an important component of a robust enterprise risk management program and an important way to mitigate cyber risks. It's not the only way to mitigate cyber risks, but it's part of the solution. So essentially what we're seeing is a cyber market that is really an emerging market. It has more than doubled in the last 5 years. Munich Re, which is one of the largest reinsurers in the world, estimates the global cyber insurance market to be about $14 billion in premiums right now. But it may grow to as much as $29 billion by 2027. There are other estimates like Beasley and Specialty Insurer, for example, always forecasting that the cyber insurance market might grow to $40 billion by 2030. And that's really because of combination of factors, with the increased complexity of these risks. It's likely that companies that are currently buying cyber insurance will buy more cyber insurance. Companies that are not buying cyber insurance are likely to consider purchasing cyber insurance. And, there will be a few things, structural things that will need to happen to continue to support the growth in this market, since it's more, I would say it's an emerging market in the insurance industry. It's grown very rapidly and it's changing as the risk changes. First we're going to need to have more insurers and reinsurers supporting the market. We're likely going to need to have more capital market investors participating in the market. Over the last 2 years, for example, we saw the issuance of several cyber catastrophe bonds. That's a new thing in the insurance market, but an important thing so that capital market investors can come in with capital to support this risk. And we're likely to see, more products coming through and being developed as the market grows, and companies are likely to want to have more options of what they can purchase. It's really an evolving market.
Okay, and I want to move on to some of the challenges associated with this topic right now, and I want to stick with the insurance side for the time being, because obviously cyber risk modeling is a key element in the whole insurance process. And by what you're saying, I guess that is still evolving as well. But could you give us an idea of what the state of that is, and how insurance companies are looking at cyber aggregation and systemic risks, and also what then, if there's a company looking at this, what are the minimum levels of cybersecurity hygiene that they need to be looking at to achieve to be eligible for insurance?
Sure. So, I would say compared to other areas of insurance, such as property catastrophe, for example, where, companies have very sophisticated catastrophe models to try to analyze and predict the level of losses related to different hurricanes that may be coming through, for example. I would say, cyber insurance modeling is in its early stages. It provides some indication of what the risks may be, but it's not a complete picture. That's a significant area of focus for companies now. A number of risk modelers are spending a lot of time and resources to improve cyber risk modeling. Insurance and reinsurance companies are also looking to improve that. Aggregation risk is really top of mind in terms of concern, because you could potentially see very quickly, right, a situation that a massive event can have an impact across many industries and geographies, and you could have a significant aggregation and a massive cat loss in your hands. So this area is an area that I think needs to be better understood, and that's important because if to the degree that this risk is better understood, then more insurance companies and reinsurance companies are likely to be comfortable entering the market and feel like they can appropriately price for their risk, right? So that's very important. So cyber modeling is going to continue to evolve. You will need to evolve. There are areas that are probably not insurable. War and massive infrastructure attacks, for example, may be too large for the insurance industry to manage, and it may require public-private partnerships in which governments may need to provide some kind of backstop to support those kinds of losses. So I would say that's also in early stages of discussion with different governments, but that's likely to evolve. We're likely to see some of that happening as the risks become larger. Now, just switching to your second question in terms of, if you are a company looking to buy cyber insurance, what is the minimum level of cyber hygiene necessary to buy cyber insurance? And in the last few years, insurers have become stricter about requiring good cyber hygiene before you're even eligible to purchase cyber insurance. So that's like if you don't have that minimal cyber hygiene, they won't even offer cyber insurance to you, because the premise is we should be doing everything we can to prevent these risks, and then we need to have minimal levels of prevention. So they are requiring things like multi-factor authentication, data backup, incident response plans, cyber training for employees, among other requirements. But the idea again is you want to prevent this from happening to begin with, and then you're buying cyber insurance to make sure you're covered in case of that event. But companies have become more strict in terms of requiring this.
Okay, and so it's one thing to be ready to, or to think, okay, well, we'll just get some insurance and that that's gonna help us cover our risk or completely cover it, which it may well not. But perhaps even more fundamental to that, but related to it, but also more fundamental, is whether business leaders are really taking this seriously, especially in terms of the operational technology that they have. So, Rob, how seriously do you think they are taking it in the context of enterprise risk?
Well, very seriously. So I've been in the space, or thinking in a dedicated way about the space, since about 2014. And the shift in attention and priority is remarkable. So some loose statistics I ran across, I'd say back to 2014, 2015 timeframe, survey respondents at the C-suite or board level, is this a topic of concern? It was in the 25 to 30% range, right? Fast forward to the beginning of 2020, 2024, similar survey asking the same question. The topic of concern respondents had was in the 75% plus range. So big shift in awareness. Obviously, the bad guys out there have helped us with NotPetya and other, really big marquee events that are out there and newsworthy. And the next step that we're seeing is the complement to that question is, are you aware of it and are you going to do anything about it, right? So that, and are you going to do anything about it? Response, meaning budget, organization, structure. We see that coming into place as well. Harkening back to the question about, or the comment about cyber hygiene though, as a product manager, as soon as we say, well, there's a standard, right, or something like that, or we're going to do cyber hygiene, my first question is, show me the definition of cyber hygiene, right? And so if we're running around the world saying, from an insurance perspective, you must have cyber hygiene, well, okay, yep, we're going to have cyber hygiene, but what is that specifically? And then the other piece is, from a compliance perspective, how are you governing whatever that cyber hygiene is so that, it's classic audit, right? I say I'm doing this and I can prove it. That seems like a missing angle too. So I may say, sure, I put antivirus across all of my workstations and HMIs. And then, my license expired, I didn't renew it. And, 3 to 4 years later, yeah, we put antivirus across everything, but it's not working. So there's a compliance angle, and not to rabbit hole here, but it just starts to unpack. I think it's manageable, but we need more definition, more alignment, more measurability.
All right.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'd love to jump in on the whole cyber hygiene thing.
Yeah, please do.
Every time I hear the word cyber hygiene, I cringe for exactly the word Rob. I just want to go find the barf bag. Because it's such an apple pie and motherhood statement, oh yeah, we have cyber hygiene, or you should be doing, or they didn't have good enough cyber hygiene. It's really so poorly defined and so blaming, it's used for so much blame. And it's also, one person's hygiene is not the next person's hygiene. Hygiene is, again, it's just a dangerous comment. Really what we want is risk-based analysis of what we're going to do. And again, I'll give you a really good example of unfortunately, the company I work with right now forces password resets regularly, where you have to come up with a new password. And they call that, you can call that cyber hygiene if you want, but it's actually degrading the security of the organization, because and this has been shown over and over, when you force people to do new passwords every 30 days, all they do is tack a number on the back of it. And so you actually go downhill. And this has been, and so if you read the NIST standards for password management and everything else, they do not force password rollover. Companies do that in the name of cyber hygiene. So it really has to be, hey, what are the risks we're dealing with? And what are we going to do to deal with those risks? Not a bunch of checkboxes that look like you've got hygiene. Sorry about that rant.
No, that's good. Yeah. So start with the risk rather than with the the measures.
Yes, absolutely.
And not to pile on, but I thank you, Eric, for taking a poke at the hygiene word. I've always had a reaction to it too, but wasn't brave enough to call it out. I've been in great conversations when we talk about risk with some water utility business owners recently, and we started off with like what must always work and what must never happen. And just listening to these people, I am not a water business expert, but I love to hear people talk about their business and what matters. And within that, you begin to get a sense of how do they think about risk. And it was just I'm not even going to honor it by calling it a tabletop exercise, but we kind of said, well, what are the most important things, and got a big list. And then if you could only pick 3 of those things, what would they be? And it was so eye-opening, because priority number 1, water quality, right? And so when you think about risk, what all do we need to do to assure water quality? Delivery, right? It's got to be distributed. The infrastructure has to work and be maintained. And so all kinds of good stuff cascades out of that. And then I really liked the third one that they prioritized because it really spoke to the industrial mindset. It was safety, employee safety. There are systems under extreme pressure that if they fail, an employee could lose their life or be harmed in a significant way. And so somehow, Eric, just talking to what you said about measurement, right? It's like, well, if we find out what our priorities are, then we talk about water quality. Well, how do we measure that and hold ourselves accountable to that? And that's.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to, I mean, because what the example you just gave is a good example, but those are risks that the company's worried about. But all of them are affected by everything you might do to do hygiene. So I don't see how, knowing that, like I agree with the risk thing is really there, Eric's comment, and I agree with it. But it's there. What I see it is more, there are not enough people to do everything that needs to be done to maintain the security of plants, of facilities in particular. That's more what I know. And so they start not doing things. So in that case, yes, trying to decide what's the most important thing to do is very important because it helps you, triage what you're going to triage the things you have to do, and so you can use your people. You're leaving some things undone. But when you ask somebody what's your concerns and they say water quality, well, that's it. I could accept that, of course. I would hope that's what they worry about. But what does that mean from a cybersecurity perspective? Not much, because, well, does that mean I better take care of my antivirus? Does that mean I better make sure I do something with remote access? Does that mean, it means all of those things. So I think the things get a little mixed up there in a way. So, but hygiene is a big problem. It's one of the, we've been harping about that for years. We have things in RCI, I call them cybersecurity management solutions. Everybody goes out and buys the technologies to put in the defenses. Like you said, they buy endpoint protection of some type, but then they can't maintain it. Or they'll buy remote access, and then they can't maintain the passwords. And so they tend to ignore the problem of having to maintain. That's one of the big challenges that I see. Anyhow, that's kind of getting off topic. Anyway.
Well, but it kind of segues quite nicely into the next thing I wanted to cover with you, Sid, which is why is a good OT cybersecurity program not enough, given that a lot, at least, possibly even most disruptions are actually originate within as IT system compromises and not OT. So perhaps you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, that's why the OT cybersecurity is not enough. I mean, I come from the automation world, and we've talked about OTs. We talk about OT cybersecurity for years and how important it is. Used to be, we used to call it ICS cybersecurity or some other kind of an acronym, and that was the focus. And everybody said that's the key thing, that's the jewels and all that kind of stuff. And what we've learned is, no, you can stop an operation by stopping something on the outside. You don't have to stop the operation. That was exactly what happened to Colonial Pipelines. The pipelines were functionally quite okay, as they realized, but they couldn't they couldn't follow the transaction, so they couldn't manage it, so they couldn't bill anybody. So they decided they had to shut down their operations. There was also concern of propagation from the IT system into the OT system. So it's one thing I kind of evangelize, I try to, is you can't just, the world of just looking at OT systems and saying, putting up this perimeter, which has always been there from the Purdue model and everything like that. Just worrying about what's on the inside is not enough. You can do everything you can there, but you can still have problems. So you have to think outside the box. And, we use this term, cyber resilience is the term I focus on a lot. And usually I want to clarify that, because sometimes people talk about cyber resilience means having a cybersecurity program that's resilient, and that's important. I'm talking about thinking of cybersecurity, the resiliency of your operations. The whole goal in the end is to keep the operations operating. And that can involve something that might go wrong on the inside, something might go wrong on the outside. So people have to look at it from the back end almost. I kind of came up with something a couple of years ago. I mentioned we have this event every year, our ARC Forum, and we have a big cybersecurity program. So I'm always thinking of new things to talk about. And that was our theme last year. And I mentioned that one thing I see is, for years since I've been involved in cybersecurity, people have always started from the beginning, saying, oh, let's go and do an assessment. Let's find out what's wrong. And then let's start putting in technology to solve these specific problems, which is wonderful. But then what they never do is they don't get the backups and things like that until they end. They don't start off. And I think where you have to start is by saying, let's start off and just say, what if I lose something because of a cyber attack? I don't know what kind of attack it's going to be, but I'm going to lose something. Do I have the backup to get me back up from that event? And if you did that, then you're going to be a lot more resilient than if you sit here and just worry about putting in defenses and solving the problems you think are there, that the attackers aren't going to attack any other. They're going to come in through another door. They're going to do something different. And that's one of the problems I always have with cyber hygiene, too. I don't want to go back to that, or cybersecurity. Cyber hygiene is generally focused on doing the things you should do to protect the things that you might go wrong. But it does nothing to say, how do I protect against the things that I don't know about? It's the known knowns, the unknown, the unknown unknowns, the unknown unknown, whatever that phrase was.
It's the Rumsfeld quadrant.
Yeah, the Rumsfeld phrase. And I'm a big believer in you have to say, well, there's some unknowns I don't know any about, so I better do whatever I can to make sure I can get back up. So anyhow, so that's so I don't think, we certainly encourage companies to do whatever they can to manage their security good and put in the right defenses. You can't ignore that. I'm not saying ignore that, but my point about the OT not being enough is you have to look at it from a global thing. We talk a lot about IT and OT cybersecurity convergence, and it's trying to bring those two things together, because the problem encompasses everything, including cloud apps, all kinds of things today. So I don't know if I answered that. I sort of
yeah. Rob, you wanna say something?
Well, Eric, you were raising your hand, and then I've got a question for Sid.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Sid's got a really good point on the whole question of backups. I mean, if you go and look at a good cybersecurity framework like the NIST CSF, it has the 5 pillars: protect, detect, etc. And the very last one is recover. And it's, I think, to Sid's point, I think people forget. They get to 1 and 2, they detect and protect, and they forget about recover. But I'd also point out that the bad guys have figured out how to attack backups. And I've been on several projects, and my colleague Ron Brash has done some really interesting research on backup corruption and attacks on backups and the issues with backups. He did a really cool presentation last year at S4 that you might be able to see online. And it's really important to it's a bit circular, but hey, we've got a recovery system here. Okay, how do we protect this recovery system? And that's really important. Ron and I've been spending a lot of time looking at making sure people have backups, as Sid says, and not just did the protect and detect, but then looping back and saying, okay, how are we detecting and protecting problems inside those backups? What the heck is actually in those backups? Back to you, Rob.
That could be even more important than protecting the system again.
Yes.
Anyhow.
Yeah. Congratulations. You just re-promoted your ransomware into your production environment, right? So integrity.
Exactly.
So going back to this data and modeling point, that the maturity around that, and I think what Laline was pointing out, what was going through my head is with 2 teenage drivers that I insure, that model's pretty good. OT cyber doesn't have the same level of maturity and quality of assessing risk as assessing risk for teenage drivers. So we often, cyber hygiene, even though we're trying to take that word off the table, aside, we talk about it being something additive to the OT architecture. Like, oh, well, it's insecure and you need to bring in all these things. And this is a professional area of curiosity for me. I often wonder, well, if we want to understand the risk posture or the state of the operational environment, why aren't we asking those kind of questions of the automation control system itself? That's the fundamental purpose of that system, is to be on top of and manage and control the asset environment. And, well, not to shamelessly plug AVB, but when we think about this problem, we're asking those kind of questions like, what can the DCS or components in that architecture tell us about security state and risk? And I think that's really interesting because, well, yes, we do need to bring in other compensating controls and configurations and things like that, there's a resource there that if you know how to ask the right question of the data that it has access to, may tell you about your security posture, about your likelihood of process disruption. So I'm going to throw that out there. Sid, that was to you. I wanted to hear your reaction to it. Well,
I agree completely, and not promoting ABB, but I remember having interviews with ABB for years. You are one of our clients. I'll just say that, and we talk to ABB a lot.
Yeah, you have to disclose that.
Yeah, of course I do. But I mean, I was always impressed because there was a big thought about how can I use the automation system to help with the cybersecurity, and what can I put into your system, into your products to protect, to enable better monitoring, better security internally. It's not just building a secure box. Everybody does that, I think, and hopefully, I think it's getting better that way. Eric might know more about that than me, but I think the boxes are getting better. Everybody's box, whatever box it is, and I say DCS, PLCs, whatever. But what's that? But another way to look at it, and I applaud ABB for that, is they say, well, how can we use the box? What more can we do, not just to protect the box per se, but how can we use the box and capabilities in the box and maybe add something to enable us to protect outside the box and the whole system and things like that. So I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that's very important. I don't know that all the automation companies are doing that. I'm not trying to get down on any other supplier, because all of them are clients of ARC, so I'm not going to say anything negative about them. But I think I don't see it as explicitly highlighted as much as I have with ABB, which is good. So again, there's my promotion for ABB. Sorry.
Well, bringing it full circle though, back to this convergence question, right? So this could be another dimension of convergence, and a very interesting conversation between, the operator, the OEM, and someone like Laleen, and that how do we express, measure, quantify risk? And then back to that, well, water quality, that's important. Well, great. So what metrics, what data is available to measure that, to measure or identify activities that could compromise that? And then that gets to the compliance piece, because I would never underwrite, well, I'm not an insurer, full disclosure. I would never underwrite someone who said they're doing good security, showed me a PowerPoint, showed me some artifact, and couldn't prove it on a regular basis, right? Like, sure, great, you said you do good security. Is it continuous? Can you prove it? I think that's a really important point, and it needs data.
Yeah. All right. Brilliant. We are kind of running a little bit behind, so I want to, given that you were talking about insurance again, and I wanted to bring Laleen in again just to give us a snapshot of which kind of companies are buying cyber insurance right now. And I think a lot of the time when we think about these things, we're thinking about as the examples you've already given, huge oil companies, big water facilities companies, whatever. But what about the smaller and medium-sized companies, right? Because they're getting attacked as well, increasingly. So how well protected are they, Laleen? Maybe you can just give us a picture of who's buying insurance, who isn't, and who needs to.
Sure, and maybe not surprising from the conversation we're having here, it's really the larger companies that are currently buying cyber insurance, and not all of them are purchasing cyber insurance, but a majority of them are buying some level of cyber insurance. And these are typically companies that have more sophisticated enterprise risk management programs, more sophisticated ways of understanding cyber risk, and have greater awareness of the risk. Just to give you an idea, an insurance company called Aviva, which is a very large insurer in the world, has estimated that about 17% of small businesses are protected, and purchase cyber insurance. So really the majority of small and mid-sized companies do not currently buy cyber insurance. And I think for a number of reasons, right? Lack of awareness, but also lack of resources. Maybe difficult, and maybe it's expensive to purchase it. It's expensive to implement cyber hygiene, the word that we don't want to use. But as time evolves, I think it's likely that these companies will be looking to buy cyber insurance. and that we're going to see more products that are able to, offer some type of protection for these smaller and mid-sized companies. But I think what everyone here is saying, Rob, Sid, and Eric, is that the way you even think about cyber risk is evolving from inside the company, right? What are the potential areas of risk that could lead to a cyber incident? And perhaps the small and mid-sized companies need that help the most, because they don't necessarily have the internal resources to analyze all that. And typically, insurance companies tend to come in and offer, and also insurance brokers, they tend to offer some advice to insureds on how to mitigate the risk and how to think about potential areas of risk. And I would imagine as time evolves, this role might become more important, as with small and mid-sized companies working with insurers to maybe gain some knowledge from them. What else do they see in the market, and how can they apply some of that knowledge to their internal practices? So that's going to become, I think, something that is likely to evolve as well, because those companies could potentially be, at significant financial risk and see very significant business interruption losses in the future.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so I want to make sure that we leave a bit of time at the end for some questions, as I said at the beginning. So I want to start looking a little bit into the future, but also getting a little bit practical in terms of what companies can do now. But so if we just look at the regulatory situation, if I come to you first, Eric, are there any cyber regulatory requirements coming up that are going to have a big impact? And of course, on top of that, we've got the buzzword of the moment, AI. And so if you could also talk a little bit about what impact AI is going to potentially have on the cybersecurity landscape in the next few years. Oh, Eric, I think we've lost your sound.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
there. How's that? Better? Okay,
better.
Thank you. Yeah, so let's start with that regulatory question. Yes, there's a ton of regulatory requirements coming down the pipe, depending on where you are. It will vary slightly. So if you're in Europe, you'll be dealing with a set of regulations called NIS2 or NIS2, not to be confused with NIST, the National Standards and Testing, but this is NIS2. And those are very, very clear regulatory requirements for cyber that both have significant impact on anybody trying to sell a product, not a security product, but a product that connects to the network in any way, which includes control systems, or anybody trying to use one of those products. So very, very heavy regulations. In North America, the regulations tend to be more a little sector specific. So we've seen regulatory requirements coming out of course, NERC-CIP, regulatory requirements coming out of the U.S. government for anybody buying or selling into U.S. government agencies. We're seeing regulatory requirements for the medical industry. So yeah, and I just came back from Singapore. Singapore government is putting in regulatory requirements for anything that's called it's considered critical national infrastructure. So yep, here comes the regulatory. Here comes an onslaught of regulatory requirements. Get ready for it, guys. Okay. And you really want to be in front of it. Do you want me to do AI, or does anybody else want to do regulatory?
Maybe I'll just mention that there's an increasing number of states in the U.S. that are implementing data privacy regulation, and that's going to be a source of exposure for companies because if there is a cybersecurity event, a data breach, and individuals' data information was leaked out, and you didn't have permission to use that information, or individuals feel like they did not give the corporation permission to share their information to begin with, or collect that information, that's going to become an increasing source of regulatory risk for companies. So and we're expecting to see more and more states implementing these data privacy laws, and that's going to impact potential lawsuits going forward.
And I just saw Ravinda, if you guys are following the chat, just put in a whole list of all the stuff coming out of Europe. NIS2, the the EU Data Act, Cyber Resilience Act, and on and on and on. Yeah, there's a pile, and that's just Europe. North America's seeing the same thing. Asia, I'm seeing the same thing. Do we want to tackle AI?
Yeah. So just give us a few words on AI, please.
Yeah. Okay. So AI's here. I mean, we've just been buried by ChatGPT articles, etc. We're going to have to use AI to improve. The bad guys are going to use the AI. So there's no sense tying our one hand behind our back. And AI we've been doing a lot. I've personally been doing a lot of work on AI application in cybersecurity for things like associating vulnerabilities to products. That is just a miserable job to do. It's just is a nasty job for a security analyst to go and try and figure out if a particular product has a particular vulnerability. There's lots of opportunities for AI to help and really leave the difficult tasks, the ones that really require true intelligence, to the analyst. And the grunt work, AI I think has got phenomenal opportunities to sort of take away a lot of the grunt work I see. And Sid mentioned earlier about the shortage of people. That is just absolutely a shortage of, I absolutely agree with him. There's a shortage through our entire industry on talented cybersecurity professionals. Get the AI to do the low and easy stuff. And I think we'll see that more and more, and get the professionals to focus on the professional work. So I think AI is absolutely going to be critical to deal with that. If we don't do that, we're going to just fall further and further behind. That's my thoughts on that.
Fantastic. Rob, did you want to come in on something?
Well, I totally agree. It's a great application of offloading or putting workload off of the professionals who need to focus more in other areas. And I go back to the compliance piece. AI is a wonderful new tool that can be used to scale the effort that you've got to go through and offload some of the more mundane work that just requires time. Sorry, nothing hugely clever to say there. I agree with Eric. How about that?
All right. So,
can I make a comment? Go ahead, Lily. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'll just quickly comment that the other side of it is AI is also going to be used by the cyber criminals, and that's going to increase the number of cyber attacks exponentially, and the different angles it may come from. So it's going to be a little bit of a battle to see which of the two sides is going to win on that.
It's really an arms race.
But
it's straight up arms.
Comment?
Yeah.
As whenever you mention in my background, I mean, I have a PhD and part of it's in AI, all right? But it was a long time ago when I got my PhD, AI and operation. And a lot of what people are calling AI today is really just, it's become the buzzword for anything anybody does to help anybody do anything. Now, I do agree completely with so I get very frustrated. I actually had a session at our forum last year, about protecting AI within plants. And I struggled to find some applications where it was really being used, what I called AI. And everybody was doing it. They weren't worried about that aspect, but they weren't using other AI per se. Now, what we see happening in the security world that I think is very important is the point Eric made, because we're very focused on people again. And there aren't enough people, and anything you can do to make it easier for people to do stuff like find vulnerabilities and things like that. I don't know if I call that AI, because I don't know what type of AI technique we're talking about to find vulnerabilities. I think that's more operations research, just analytics or other mathematical models and a way to find stuff. But
it's really machine learning.
Which I call that something, but anyhow, maybe because I'm an engineer, I mean, a core, that kind of thing. But certainly the ChatGPT capabilities, and generative AI in general, that's being used to help people, to enable people who are less skilled to find things, to guide them in what they're doing, is one of the things I see a lot of companies adopting. I think that's a very positive thing. You call them, some of them are just co-pilots in a way and stuff like that. But to try to take someone who's less skilled and make them more skilled to enable them, so we kind of reduce the need for the experts that we need. I'm hopeful that works, but again, I have a long history in AI, and we've gone down this path many, many times where AI gets this big hit is going to solve all the problems of the world. And then 5 years later, it just kind of goes away. And then it'll come up with another name. I don't know. So it always comes up as AI because people like the idea of artificial intelligence. But I think it certainly is going to affect it, and it's needed. And part of the reason, and it's also increasing the risk, the way Laleen said, because people are using that to generate code, to find new ways to attack and modify malware. There's all kinds of things they're doing with that. And that's very understandable. That is truly AI, I think, the general stuff.
All right, I want to give each of you a chance to give the audience one kind of big tip or practical thing that they can do right before we go to some questions. So if I come to you first, Rob, what do you think companies should be doing now to address all of these risks more effectively? What's if they realize they're not addressing enough at the moment, what should they do first, or what's one of the most important things that they should be doing?
Yeah, so I'll just give an example of how I've seen it done well.
Yeah.
And it's really focusing on and aligning on the priorities of the business, because within that are elements of your risk. It's not a one and done process, so it feels very tabletop-like. So you get stakeholders and you run this exercise and you talk it through and you enhance it, you take things on and off the table. I think that from a compliance and risk management perspective, and this higher level, C-suite or board level perspective, those conversations can make the topic more accessible, right? So when we talk about risk related to cyber, it means this specifically in our business, and they don't need to know, AI. They don't need to know. Of course, if they're curious, they can figure it out, but they don't need to know the details of cybersecurity. They just need to understand it as a topic that is a priority in their enterprise. And so I guess long-winded way of saying, have these tabletop exercises, get cross-functional members who understand various aspects of the business, and identify and prioritize and get a plan against those elements of risk.
Fantastic. Sid, top tip from you?
Well, I'll add to what Rob just said, because for me, the answer for a lot of this is one of the things I promote a lot, I guess you would say, but is IT/OT cybersecurity. I use the term convergence, so seems to die. That's like that doesn't resonate well. Everybody doesn't talk. They don't like the word convergence. They think that means IT is going to take over everything else. But so I see collaboration or integration. But anyhow, do that. And part of that we're going to be discussing at our forum coming up in February is start to adopt more of the IT type technology, the more advanced cybersecurity technology, and start embracing it and using it within the OT systems. And part of that is first upgrade your networks and then start adopting and getting other products. I think it'll help solve the compliance issues more, regulatory issues. There's a lot of tools out there that can be used, and people aren't doing it. There's always been this fear. We don't want to let that OT stuff into our IT system, so I think the time has come to do that. It can increase the risks in some senses, but it can also provide better defense. And so to me, that goes along with what Rob said, because to do that, you got to get, when you have these people all get together, business people, you're talking about issues. Nobody in that meeting is saying, well, what part of that is actually in the OT system, or what part of that's in the, nobody does that. It's really, what's the issue here? And what I find CEOs and things like that doing, they say, I don't care what the problem is. I want the cyber problem solved. And they tend to go to their CIO, and then he goes to the CSO, and then it rolls down from there. So anyhow, that's my main comment.
Thanks, Sid. Eric?
I actually have three top tips, but first of all, the first one is I think really playing off of what Sid just said there. Forget about the fact that there's OT and IT. It is going to be all one system at the end of the day. They're going to impact each other. They're going to use the same technology. And as Sid's colleague, Eric Kosman, used to say, and I love this, he said, there's never a leak just in your end of the boat. There's never just a problem with IT or never just a problem with OT. It's the whole boat is sinking. So you've got to work together. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and Jaleel just popped it up on the comments, but you really want to make sure that you're aligning your activities, your cyber activities, with your business objectives. And I think this goes back to what Rob says. Hey, our job here is to make good water. What can somebody do to mess up the water quality? Okay, here's our cyber objectives to ensure that our business objectives are met. Again, I see companies go chasing cyber objectives that I don't really think align to their business objectives. And lastly, stealing a little too much time here, but go back to the automation. We don't have enough people doing this job. We're going to have to do what Sid says and start to take in and really take advantage of the technologies we're seeing in IT to defend OT and not say, oh, it's just an IT product. No, we're going to, and particularly around whether you call it machine learning or adaptive control or AI, we're going to have to really start to take advantage of the intelligence we've got and use tools like Rob's companies has, to really understand what's going on that plant floor and make decisions in a more automated manner. I mean, we did this control systems. It's control systems, guys. We didn't have enough people to actually turn the valve manually. So we control systems. We got to do it for security.
Thanks, Eric. Laleen, very quickly, what's one thing that they should do in terms of their looking for cyber insurance or being prepared for cyber insurance?
Sure. As a credit analyst at Moody's, I would say we're always looking at the financial angle of this and how cyber risks can impact the financial health of companies. So it comes down to enterprise risk management. And I think the most basic thing that management teams and board of directors need to be doing is to try to essentially identify the cyber risks, look to quantify them, and then figure out how to mitigate them. And the quantification part of the risk is important. I think here we heard many ways in which it can be done, but it's good to think that many people in board at the board level, they are not necessarily cyber experts. But if you tell them that a business interruption type of attack can cost X million dollars to a company over a period of, a couple of weeks to a couple of months, that will catch their attention to it. So at the end of the day, I think being able to translate it to financial losses, what are the actual losses that can incur, and be able to discuss that with the board of directors and to the management teams, the CFO and CEO of the company, that's very important to bridge that gap so that companies can actually make decisions based on how they can mitigate potential financial losses from these risks.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Laleen. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Audience members, we will do our best to get to your questions after the event. Sorry we couldn't get to them today. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to the sponsor of the session, ABB.